laugh yourself into stitches, and today I'm at Lois Sew and Back getting ready to teach my Farmer's Wife Class 1. I'm going to be using this Farmer's Wife book for a 12-month journey, completing 111 blocks. And if you haven't viewed my prep class video, you should really take a moment to look at that. It takes you through how to cut your fabrics, how to pick out fabrics, how to prepare your fabrics, and also has a number of notions and tips for piecing successfully. The first thing you want to do is get organized by cutting out your blocks and labeling the pieces that go inside of each block. A lot of quilters have 3-ring notebooks that they have plastic sleeves and slip their blocks inside, or their cut pieces for each block. And I recommend labeling each fabric that goes into each block, so if you're not piecing them right away, at least you'll be able to go back and remember what it is that you're piecing. I, on the other hand, don't have time to do really nice little notebooks and everything, so I have your basic manila envelope, and inside my manila envelope I have fabrics. I put my little fabric choices inside envelopes and label those and stick it back in here for when I get to class 11, which is this one. It depends on what you want to do, it's up to you, but getting organized and labeling those fabrics ahead of time is very important. And I also recommend you can label inside your book, you know, I want this green to go here, or whatever colors, and you can just label. Don't be afraid to write in your book. Class 1 has fairly easy blocks. Started it out this way so you can get comfortable piecing tiny pieces. Get your 1/4 inch lined up, pressing properly, and squaring up your units. But to begin, we are going to be learning a new technique, maybe new to you, called corner triangle squares. And you simply draw a diagonal line on the back of a square that you're going to use. Triangle. Here's an example that I just finished. It's a square drawn line, and I stitched just a hair to the right using Aurifil thread, and then I pressed it over to one side, and it lines up with the background. Now I go ahead and trim this background and get rid of that extra bulk. If you find that your corner triangle doesn't line up to the background, you have 2 choices. You can take it out with a seam ripper carefully, you don't want to distort your fabrics, or you can go ahead and cut everything and do it again. Sometimes when you use a seam ripper on small squares, it will distort the fabric. I know you don't like to hear that, but better start out right than continue building on a wonky block. Okay, the first thing that we're going to learn today in class 1 is how to read our ruler. And we are going to be cutting a 1 7/8 inch square. Your ruler is very important. It is divided up into 1/8 inch marks for each inch. When you're getting ready to cut your 1 7/8 inch strip, you'll want to place that 7/8 inch mark right on top of your fabric. You can see it right there. And you'll count over 1 inch, and then each of these little marks represents 1/8 of an inch. So you count over 7, line that up, and then go ahead and make your cut. But it is very important to get used to your ruler, identify where those marks are so you're comfortable with it. Remember, halfway is your 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/4 inch, and eventually, I think in class 2, we will be cutting 1/16 of an inch. So you'll want to get comfortable with your ruler. The next technique that we're going to learn today in class is how to deal with loose triangles. And loose triangles have 2 sides that should be cut straight of grain so they don't stretch on both sides, but your middle, where you've cut it in half, this middle section will stretch, and you want to be careful of that bias. You can heat set and add some starch to that to stabilize it, and that will help it. You're going to be adding a loose triangle and making a square and a square. So with a square and a square, you start with a background square. I fold it in half to finger press. Once I've identified that finger pressed center, I do the same with my triangle unit and create a finger press there. Now I know that I have the center of each. I can line it up and I can set a pin, keeping that in place. I can either use a pin, or I can use my seam-align, and seam-align is a little lightweight glue I can stick on that center area and heat press it, and then take it over to my sewing machine and stitch it out, and it will hold in place until it's done. So once that is finished, you'll have a unit that looks like this. And with a square and a square, you do the same thing by finger pressing the opposite side and adding the triangle just like we did the first one. The next thing we'll do is press our unit in half and finger press to create that center mark. Do the same with your loose triangle. These will be ironed out. You'll add that, stitch it, and go ahead and flip it. And then do the same to the opposite end. And you'll get a unit. Do I have a unit? I don't think I have. Oh. And you'll have a little unit that looks like this corner unit here in the wedding star block. Last thing we're going to learn today for class 1 is sewing longer strips together. And sometimes when you're sewing long strips together, they can get uneven and sort of warped. What I recommend doing is placing your 2 strips together, and this of course are pretty short strips, and I try to not have strips so long. I think the longest ones that I have to be sewn together in class 1 is about 16 inches. That's getting a little bit long, but put them right sides together, put them on your ironing board and heat set them. And also introduce some vest press and stabilize it and heat set it. Then go ahead, take it to your sewing machine and stitch it down. Once you flip that seam open, you want to be careful that you're not distorting that seam and it's going like this. So be very careful that way. I've sewn this long strip together. It was longer and I've subcut it into smaller units. Okay, the one thing that I pay attention to when I'm subcutting these strips into smaller units, I will place, let's say they're 1.5 inch strips or subcut units. I want to place a line on my ruler right directly on top of my seam line so I know that's square, and my 1.5 inch line on the fabric. And once that is done, I can go ahead and make my cut. It's important to line up your seam with a mark on your ruler. Every once in a while, after maybe 3 or 4 cuts, you're going to want to square up that raw edge again and get a nice clean cut and continue subcutting. Again, you want to line up a line on your ruler right across the seam line and make that cut clean. Then turn it around and continue subcutting your units. Okay, that concludes the tips and techniques used in class 1. Hope you found them helpful as you move. That concludes the tips and techniques for class 1. If you're following along on the PDF files and doing your classes that way, please join our Farmer's Wife Facebook group. You can find it at Facebook/Karen Walker. You can find it at Facebook/Karen Walker's Farmer's Wife Quilt. I think that's it. I'll put it, no. I could just put it in the thing. Please join our Farmer's. If you're following along on the PDF classes, please join our Farmer's Wife group and you'll see the, did I show this? Did I show this in my I already did the organized.
You did the organized. We've got that one. Yeah.
Okay. If you're doing the PDF classes online, please join our Farmer's Wife Facebook group where you'll find lots of tips and helpful, where you find lots of tips, where you will find lots of inspiration from other farmers plowing their way through this wonderful Farmer's Wife book. Thank you.